Yes, I'm talking about pictures I would have liked to have done but didn't do, and sometimes I did pictures that I wanted very badly to do, and they turned out poorly. Those are the only kind of chances I have reference to.
Bing Crosby enchanted millions with his warm baritone and natural elegance for decades, becoming America's golden voice. There was a reality that few ever saw beneath the beautiful vocals and seasonal happiness, though. A bombshell inside his own family has put a lasting shadow on his polished legacy nearly half a century after he passed away. His offspring have spoken up at last, and their confirmation alters everything. When the most famous singer in the world passed away, what secrets did he carry with him? What gave his own sons the willies? If Crosby's most memorable performance to date is the truth that finally surfaced after 48 years, you might want to stick around. As the fourth of 7 children, Bing Crosby came from a Catholic working-class household. His family moved to Spokane when he was 3 years old, and he spent most of his formative years there. His Irish-American mother, Catherine Harrigan, nurtured a lifelong appreciation for music in her son, Harry Lincoln Crosby, while his father, Harry Lincoln Crosby, was a bookkeeper. Bing was a law school prospect while he was a student at Gonzaga University and Gonzaga High School. As a product of his Jesuit upbringing, he possessed a natural talent for oratory and debate, but his heart ultimately belonged to music. The burgeoning American entertainment world fascinated Crosby even as a child. He was able to see vaudeville performances in Spokane because to his summer job at the Auditorium Theater. Artists like Al Jolson, whose magnetic stage presence and emotionally charged narrative greatly impacted Crosby's singing style, had an indelible impact on these performances. His father owned an early phonograph, a luxury for the time, so he could listen to recordings at home, which was a rare privilege. He became enamored with the nascent jazz style through these records and would spend the rest of his life incorporating its improvisational flair and rhythms into his own work. On the other hand, Crosby met Al Rinker, a fellow Spokane resident and pianist in the early 1920s. The two hit it off. They performed as a pair all across the Pacific Northwest, playing at college dances and nightclubs. They gained fans because to their silky vocals and clever antics on stage. The two were so inspired that they decided to go to Los Angeles in quest of better chances. There, they caught the attention of industry insiders, who helped book them into larger venues. They broke into the professional entertainment industry because to their jazz-flavored voices and humorous antics, which distinguished them from other performers of the day. When Bing and Rinker were hired by the renowned bandleader Paul Whiteman in 1926, it was a watershed moment in their early careers. The priceless exposure not only put Crosby in the company of legendary performers from the era, but it also helped him break into the national market. The Rhythm Boys were formed when pianist Harry Barris quickly joined the duo. With his distinctive baritone voice and easygoing personality, Crosby became the undeniable star as their popularity skyrocketed. Bing Crosby's involvement with the Whiteman Orchestra marked the formal commencement of his professional career, launching him upon the path to become one of the 20th century's monumental performers. The revolution that changed the world's perception of music began quietly on small-town stages but would eventually sweep the globe. During the 1930s and 1940s, when Bing Crosby was performing alone, American music underwent a radical shift. Following his departure from the Rhythm Boys, Crosby's unique singing style catapulted him to popularity. Amidst economic hardship and global strife, his easygoing and pleasant baritone delivery resonated with viewers. Hits like White Christmas, which came out in 1942, were iconic immediately. To this day, it is still considered a top single. His 1944 smash single, Swinging on a Star, demonstrated his range and won him an Oscar for Best Original Song. Not only were these songs economic hits, but they also defined the sound of popular music in the mid-century and were profoundly embedded in American society. Crosby was an influential figure in the development of the technology that underpinned the music industry, and his impact extended well beyond the realm of the performance hall and recording studio. Ampex was a little electronics business that started researching magnetic tape recording in the U.S. in the late 1940s, and Bing invested in it. This innovation, which had its origins in post-war German ideas that had been captured, made it possible to edit and produce audio with greater quality. The first commercial reel-to-reel tape recorders were made possible by Crosby, who not only provided funding but also assisted Ampex in refining their device. Everything from studio albums to broadcast media was affected by this discovery, which radically improved the efficiency and quality of music creation. The early use of pre-recorded radio broadcasts was a significant step forward for Crosby's broadcasting career. Live broadcasts were the standard back then, but they were far from professional and gave artists very little leeway. In 1946, Crosby started pre-recording episodes of his NBC radio show, The Philco Radio Time on magnetic tape, in an effort to alleviate the burden of his demanding live radio schedule. It was swiftly apparent that this innovation was going to alter everything, but the networks were not instantly on board with the practice. It was now time to start syndication, edit in post-production, and improve audio quality. An avalanche of changes occurred in the recording and broadcasting environment for radio and, eventually, television, as others followed Crosby's lead. It is arguable that Crosby's crooner style, the norm for male vocalists in the 1900s, would never have achieved its level of success had these technical revolutions not occurred. He pioneered a more personal, conversational approach to singing by bringing the microphone in close instead of projecting it to the rear of the theater. Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, and Dean Martin were all influenced by this new standard for vocal performance. Not only did Bing Crosby rule the charts, but he also changed the face of music production, distribution, and performance. His groundbreaking ideas shaped modern entertainment and left an indelible mark on popular culture. Bing Crosby revealed some deep-seated feelings of shame and guilt, especially concerning his fatherhood, in an unusually vulnerable interview he gave in 1959. Crosby admitted that his biggest flaw was not a lack of success in the entertainment industry or wealth, but rather an inability to adequately nurture his children, despite the widespread acclaim he received for his musical and film contributions. He came clean about the fact that he had failed to provide the nurturing environment his boys required from a father figure, particularly when they were little. The candor of Crosby stood in stark contrast to his pristine public persona during an era when famous people's parents were never scrutinized or shown introspection in the media. Crosby admitted that he had a discipline and achievement-obsessed parenting style. He was open about creating a rigid home life in which people were expected to follow rules and regulations rather than show their feelings. Crosby thought that his children would develop strength of character and perseverance if he set strict standards and expected nothing less than perfection from them. But he came to realize later on that this way of thinking deprived children of the love and attention they need by fostering emotional detachment. It was something Crosby dearly regretted in the end, since his boys were left to understand their father's rigidity as coldness rather than affection. He said that his personal childhood had a significant impact on how he raised his children. Crosby had learned the importance of morality, religious discipline, and having high standards for one's own conduct from his upbringing in a typical Catholic home in Spokane, Washington. Almost without hesitation, he used those teachings when he was a parent. But as time went on, Crosby saw that his early successes weren't always transferable to his boys, who were growing up in a different age and facing new kinds of expectations from the public. Above all else, he felt guilty about the amount of time he had wasted with his kids. The way his celebrity disrupted his precious time with his children was one of his greatest regrets. The farther he went from home for each film production, radio program, recording session, or performance, the more alone he felt. With the maturation of his kids, some of whom struggled with substance abuse and mental illness, he could see more clearly the emotional barrier that existed between them. His introspection in his latter years was more than simply an admission. It was an acknowledgement that even famous people are fallible. The autobiography, Going My Own Way, was released in 1983 by Bing Crosby's eldest son, Gary, who was married to Dixie Lee. Gary gave an honest recollection of his upbringing in it, painting a picture of his father as a cold, emotionally distant, and frequently abusive man, rather than the friendly public figure that the world knows him to be. The book caused a nationwide uproar, since it was one of the first instances of a famous youngster openly criticizing a famous parent. Much attention was drawn to the hidden truths of living inside famous homes, as Gary's open writing dispelled long-held beliefs about the Crosby family's supposedly flawless image. The graphic depiction of physical abuse that Gary said occurred often during his childhood was one of the most upsetting parts of his story. He described how, for no apparent reason, he would be slapped across the face with a belt whenever he misbehaved. He described the punishments as humiliating and severe, carried out in a home where people were afraid to speak out. Gary went on to talk about his father's penchant for using cutting words as a means of control or disappointment, as well as his own experiences with verbal degradation. He attributed his subsequent difficulties with low self-esteem and substance misuse on these events. Because of the terror he inculcated in his children, he said he hated his father as a youngster. Gary described Bing as an old man just like anyone else. Bing, in contrast, showed neither mercy or admiration for him, but instead insisted on being treated with dignity and respect. Family portraits, according to Gary, were an attempt to mask an insincere lack of affection. Much media attention was devoted to the topic of celebrity families after the publication of Going My Own Way shifted the public's perspective on the subject. Some criticized Gary for being too political, while others praised him for being brave enough to speak up. The book recast Bing Crosby as a more nuanced and, at times, disturbing character, shattering his image as an innocent American idol. It paved the door for future biographical studies of Crosby's domestic dynamics as well. Regardless of the veracity of Gary's claims, his biography prompted a rethinking of celebrity mythology and highlighted the horror of abuse in even the most admired households. Lindsey Crosby came into this world on January 5, 1938. Into a life of affluence and public intrigue. He was the youngest of 4 kids born to Bing Crosby and Dixie Lee. Lindsey was born with high expectations, being a member of a prominent American entertainment family. As a child, he and his siblings regularly joined their famous father during public appearances. Despite all the glitz, Lindsey had a troubled personal life that started early and only got worse over the years. Lindsey, like his brothers Gary, Dennis, and Philip, tried to carve out a niche for themselves in show business. He performed in musical acts with his brothers and had television appearances, but he was overshadowed by his famous family name, no matter how talented or handsome he was. Lindsey struggled to live up to the lofty standards set by the Crosby name because of the inevitability of comparisons to his famous father. He lost faith in himself as a result of the strain and what was likely an emotionally isolated and harsh childhood. His struggles with melancholy and drunkenness would follow him into adulthood. Lindsey's private life was just as chaotic. Although he fathered multiple children from his 3 marriages, his relationships were often tense, He already had a lot on his plate between legal issues, debt, and trying to keep his profession afloat. Lindsay was more entrenched in her financial and emotional quagmire by the 1980s. The prestige that came with the name suddenly seemed like an impediment. According to his loved ones, he was deeply estranged from society, which was made worse by the passing of friends and the increasing pressure he felt to live up to his prominent family status. Lindsay Crosby committed suicide at the age of 51 on December 11, 1989. His death shocked the entertainment industry and the general public, as he was the first son of Bing Crosby to take his own life. The heartbreaking reminder of the psychological toll that celebrity and unresolved personal grief can take was brought home by his untimely demise, which highlighted the human cost of public accomplishment and family legacy. One of the twin sons of Bing Crosby and Dixie Lee, Dennis Crosby, worked as a performer in the 50s and 60s. He made cameo appearances on TV shows like The Jack Benny Program and in films like The Night the World Exploded, 1957. While he was at it, he joined his brothers in performing music as the Crosby Boys in an effort to carry on the family name in show business. Despite Dennis's polished film presence and lovely singing voice, his success was overshadowed by the uniqueness of his surname. The burden of expectation became more pressing as Dennis entered adulthood. Dennis Crosby had a tough time finding his place in the entertainment world as the son of a legendary American performer, and he felt immense pressure to live up to his famous father's reputation. Over time, these demands worsened emotional instability and alcohol consumption issues. Anxieties were exacerbated by Dennis's private life. The fact that he wed Pat Sheehan, an actress and former showgirl who had dated Bing Crosby, only served to inflame tensions within his family. They went through a difficult financial period and custody fights when their marriage ended in divorce. Both emotionally and monetarily, a high-profile paternity case in the 70s was a drag. A combination of unmet familial expectations and unsolved concerns from his youth contributed to Dennis's deteriorating mental health. Dennis Crosby, at the age of 56, committed suicide on May 4, 1991, 2 years subsequent to Lindsay's death. His untimely demise added another cloud to the Crosby family's already heavy burden, demonstrating how the pressures of celebrity and legacy may affect the minds of individuals destined to carry them. July 13, 1934, was the birth date of Lindsay's twin brother, Philip Crosby. Philip maintained a more low-key existence than his brothers by juggling military duty with light engagement in the entertainment industry. His service in the United States military was distinguished. Marine Corps, gaining admiration as an individual who stays anonymous. Following his time in the service, he appeared in a few small films and TV cameos, notably Holiday in Europe, 1959. Despite his failure to achieve superstardom, he maintained a more discreet connection to the entertainment industry through these assignments than his brothers did. Philip opted for quietness over drama by never criticizing his father's upbringing in public. By keeping his mouth shut, he was able to evade the relentless media attention that befell Gary, Lindsay, and Dennis. But he still had to deal with his own problems. Accusations of drunk driving, intoxication, and a history of marriages and divorces, including those involving showgirls, surfaced. These less publicized episodes showed a guy fighting his own problems away from the limelight. On January 13, 2004, at the age of 69, Philip Crosby passed away from unnatural causes. The dignified and modest life of Bing Crosby's last son brought a melancholy finale to one of Hollywood's most scrutinized family sagas, in sharp contrast to his siblings' terrible deaths. Bing Crosby worked tirelessly to build a public presence that everyone loved. He came to represent American entertainment in the middle of the 20th century, with his soothing baritone, easygoing charisma, and innocent screen appearance. People thought of him as the amiable singer who, with hits like White Christmas and his co-starring role in feel-good flicks with Bob Hope, gave joy to audiences. He was frequently played as the perfect father figure or beloved everyman due to his composed, trustworthy, and approachable demeanor. But even among his closest friends and family, Crosby remained emotionally restrained behind his polished exterior. While not performing, he was characterized by colleagues and biographers as silent, remote, and occasionally aloof. Crosby was less likely than his contemporaries to engage in overt socializing with Hollywood heavy hitters. In private, he was cold and uncommunicative, but in public, he was professional and polite. Because of his reserved personality, he kept his personal and professional lives completely separate, making it impossible for anybody, not even close friends, to get to know the guy behind the microphone. After his first wife, Dixie Lee, passed away in 1952 from alcoholism, Bing Crosby changed for the better. Her demise made him reevaluate his life's objectives. A change in his demeanor was noticeable to those closest to him. He became more reflective and cognizant of the impact his popularity had on his loved ones. Crosby tried very hard to get back in touch with his boys as he got older. He tried to provide more personal support by inviting them on holidays and to golf tournaments after realizing that their childhood had been marked by emotional estrangement. Some of his children, particularly Lindsay, appreciated his father's late attempts at reconciliation very much. 3 additional children were brought into Crosby's family when he wed actress Katharine Grant in 1957. When he had his second brood, he reportedly became much friendlier and more affectionate. He was more present at school functions, stayed home more often, and seemed notably more loving than he had been as a father before, displaying mere patience, as some put it. Both coming of age and learning from one's mistakes in the past contributed to this development. Bing Crosby passed away unexpectedly at the age of 74 on October 14, 1977, while playing golf close to Madrid, Spain. After finishing 18 holes, he seemed to be in great spirits until he collapsed from severe heart failure and never regained consciousness. A new, more complicated chapter in the Crosby legacy, one that he had painstakingly crafted, begins with his death, which shocked the globe and ended an era. Bing Crosby's reputation started to change in the 80s and 90s. Subsequent to the suicides of Lindsay, 1989, and Dennis, 1991, and Gary Crosby's 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, which presented a clear contrast to Crosby's public image, the public began to reassess the consequences of having a famous father. Interviews conducted throughout the years have provided credence to parts of Gary's story, even though the family has not issued an official statement on his accusations or the murders of his siblings. Lindsay and a few others in the family were sympathetic to Gary's point of view, but Philip and the rest were more reserved. Bing Crosby has now been portrayed in a more complete and nuanced light by biographers and cultural historians. It would be foolish to argue his indisputable impact on American popular culture, which includes groundbreaking work in recording technology, early television and radio supremacy, and legendary fame as a singer. However, the guy behind the mic's personal responsibilities as a husband and parent take center stage in his narrative. Bing Crosby's legacy today is a tapestry of victory and sorrow. Though he was an innovator who molded contemporary media and one of the biggest names in 20th century entertainment, he was also a guy whose drive and focus occasionally got in the way of his emotional investment in his family. A prime example of the paradoxes of celebrity, his life shows how the pursuit of popularity can elevate one to the status of a cultural icon, while simultaneously obscuring the toll that being famous takes on those closest to the limelight. Like the video, comment with your ideas and subscribe for more hidden secrets about Hollywood icons if you felt this tale was as illuminating as we did. Watch the next video on your screen before you go. There's a lot more to discover.